Hey, we're almost ready for that part that everyone has been waiting for. We know we have a Hello World project. We've looked at the files that we've generated. We haven't really coded anything except for the names of our files. But you'll be glad to know that all these hard work will lead to something. And that something is actually running your application now. And you might say, what? Application? I haven't really done anything. But that's a great thing about Android development. When you create a project, it actually sets up for you a fully working application. Something that you can run on your phone or on the emulator. You go, emulator? What emulator? That's also part of the tools that you downloaded when you went to developer.android.com. So we'll bring this back to its normal screen. This is what we started with. If you look closely at your integrated development environment, Eclipse, you'll see two Android icons on the menu, on the toolbar. So this is what you'll see. The first one is your SDK manager. Okay, when you downloaded the full ADT bundle from developer.android.com, it actually came with the 4.2 development kit. If you needed to develop for other phone platforms, you have to download those. If you wanted to develop for 2.3 or you wanted to develop for some older version of Android, you need to get or you needed to download those items. Now, the other icon that you'll see there is the Android Virtual Device Manager. When you downloaded the tools, it came with the tools for you to run an Android emulator. This is something very useful in case you don't have a real Android device. The emulator, so I'll show now. This is a 2.3 emulator. For all intents and purposes, yes, it is a real phone. It works like any Android device, and it saves you from the cost of buying a phone immediately. Okay, because you can choose to start developing here. You're just trying it out. You're trying to find out if you really want to go into Android development, but you're not too sure yet, so you don't want to commit and buy a real phone. You can test your apps on the emulator. In real life, it's always better to do your development and testing on a real phone or a real device. The emulator is a good compromise in case you just want to get your feet wet and get the feel for application development. Then you might wonder, if it's a working phone, why would I bother with a real device? For a couple of reasons. One, it's not as fast as a real device. I have it up on my screen right now because I knew I was going to demonstrate it, so I had to prepare it beforehand. If you try this at home, the first time you run an emulator, it can take you anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes of waiting. No matter if you have the latest computer or an old laptop, it reacts the same way. The emulator is slow. Second, if you want to do stuff like games that can actually sense the movement of the phone, okay, or the brightness of the screen, the emulator cannot do that. If you want to use the built-in accelerometer of your phone or its gyroscope, the emulator does not have that. You want a real device for that. Again, since we're just starting out, the emulator works well for us. And you create that using the Android Virtual Device Manager. Okay, I already have those devices up here. I'll quickly show how to create a new one because for sure you guys will not have a virtual device installed yet. This one's pretty easy. Click on New. It will give you a dialog box asking for the name of your virtual device or the name of your emulator. You can use whatever name you want for it. You're a fan of Minnie Mouse, you can call your emulator Minnie Mouse. You'll also notice that there's a device target. This represents how big or how small your device is. I normally pick a 4-inch device to represent the current screens of most Android phones. Target is what operating system your virtual device will have. You can use 4.0. That's what most mid to high-end phones have right now. Support for hardware keyboard, which is your computer's keyboard. Skin with the hardware controls. If you have a webcam, the webcam is supported by the back camera. The memory that it will have, most phones right now, especially the China phones, have 512 of RAM. So this is pretty ideal for the current setup. And that's about, I keep forgetting the name. So I'm naming mine Minnie Mouse. And I'll click on OK. And that creates my virtual device. So now, if you look at my list, I have a ton of virtual devices here. So I can test on different platforms. When you have one created already, you select it. And then you click on Start. Clicking on Start gives you a couple of options. It shows you first. It shows you the resolution of your device. It also shows you the option to display a particular size depending on what monitor you have. I just leave it at the default, and to wipe previous user data. After you've selected that, you can click on Launch. The result would be an emulator popping up, just like what I have on my screen. The difference would be yours would still be booting. Again, I prepared mine beforehand, just like a cooking show, so that I can have it up here already. So if you guys are doing this at home or in your office, you can get up and get a coffee while you wait for your emulator to run. Okay, the next question there would be, why would I wait for it? Because when you start running your application, it has to run on a phone. It's the only environment where your application gets tested properly. So I'll cut to that. You guys can get your coffee, pause my video, okay, hang around or do stuff. Close your virtual device manager and go back to your integrated development environment. So we're back here. We have our project set up, and we go to the culmination of our beginning activities. We'll run your application. So again, you haven't really done much except to set up your project, set up your virtual device, and just generally check if the environment is working already. So this is the make or break part. If you look at your screen, you'll see a green play arrow on top. That allows you to run your application. A couple of other items that you can check at the bottom of your screen. There's a section there that shows you the errors or problems that your project might have. For our purposes, before we run it, click on Window, Show View, and then you'll see Console there. By selecting that, you add an extra tab at the bottom called Console. The console will help us see the output of our application. If there are problems, it will appear here. So one other thing that I'll change is what the console shows. It says DDMS right now. What we want for it is to show Android messages. So you'll quickly see messages there that represents the emulator starting up. So that means our console is working. I will now run my application. If your emulator is up and you know it's running properly, if you check it and you see the Android home screen, I haven't changed anything on the project. I'll click on play. The first time you run an Android project, you'll be given a choice as to how to run it. Most of the time, that choice is just one thing. You want to run it as an Android application. So I'll do that. I'll pick Android application and click on OK. So now we go to the moment of truth. We'll run your application. Again, just click on play. If it asks you what you want to run, say you want to run an Android application. You'll notice on my screen that it's asking me what emulator I want to use. That happens if you have multiple emulators running on your computer. I have two right now. I'll pick one. In this case, it's the emulator named Z. And I'll click on OK so that it knows where to install my APK file. So on your console screen, you'll see it giving you status messages of what is happening. It's currently installing helloworld.apk. Again, APK stands for Android package. Basically, that's the installer that you get when you need to put an application onto your device. So pretty much the process in development is I code, I compile, and then I try to install the APK. If you were using a real phone, it would be the same thing. After running the program, your device would have a copy of the application on itself. So right now, nothing is happening yet with our emulator. If I check my console, it's still telling me that it's installing the APK. And you just have to wait for it to have a result. Okay, so now it's changed. It was a successful install as indicated in my console, and it's now trying to run the activity. Okay, this is also why sometimes you want a real device when you're testing. The emulator gives you different results every time. Sometimes it's fast, sometimes it's slow. And this is one of those times where it decided that it wants to slowly show us what's happening. Okay, for most of you, you'd probably be already staring at your application. Now I can breathe a sigh of relief. I'm looking at my emulator, and this is our application right now. This is my application title. And here we can see Hello World. If you got to this point, give yourself a big round of applause, because you can now tell your mom, you can tell your dad, you can tell everyone in your neighborhood you're able to create your very first Android application. And even hold a party, because right now you have a fully working app. You can get the APK file and even install it on a real device and see that it actually works. Now that you're done congratulating yourself, we can go back to our application, and this is where the real work starts. Now that we know that we can create a project and we can actually run it, it's time for us to go into Android Basics and see what else we can do with this particular thing.